done that. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. So I work on a very small surface here, so I just kind of have to make do. And I work on a small slant board. So we said this year we would focus on this book, which is available used. The book was, I looked it up, it's 1995. And Step-by-Step Calligraphy by Susan Hufton. She's in the UK, and I know her name from, she was on the St. John's Bible team in Donald Jackson's studio. So I know she knows what she's doing. And I had found a book that she had been a consultant on, and I had started using that. And then Ellen Mott Jablonski told me about this book, and I had it on my shelf. I had used it for italic, and I had not remembered that it had Romans. So now we're using this, and I'll just start a little bit with, this is the first page of the Romans, and she's showing the different thicknesses. So this is a smaller pen, just showing the contrast and how that adds interest. Three different pens, and it looks great. And she's saying, you don't go for perfection. It looks much more lively when you just play around. This has got really rough edges, and I can actually zoom in a little bit, but really rough edges, but it still has a great look. And I noticed one thing she said, Edward Johnson talked about lettering in general, and one of his sayings was, when in doubt, use Romans. They work for everything. So you can combine them with other hands, and they look great. They always look great. And feel free, if you have any questions, unmute yourself and ask, or put something in the chat and Nan can bring it to my attention. What I wanted to do, I will demo some of these letters, writing some of them, but I wanted to talk about some of Susan's tips, and I really do recommend buying this. I found this online, I think from a Libris, but Amazon has it and some of the other book sites, and it was only a few dollars. So you pay shipping with those, but it's still not too, I think it was less than $10 by the time I was done. And it's just a wonderful reference. Susan really knows what she's doing. So what we're not doing today is she starts with a double pencil. And let's see, mine isn't right here. I cleaned up my desk, so my double pencil is no longer here, but basically you rubber band or tape two pencils together and then you write with them. And what happens is you see the angles. It's a great first step. But we're skipping that step. We might go back to that later. And then she talks about the family groups. And when I demo these, I'll talk about what she says about each family group. She shows evenly spaced, wide spacing, and much too close. So what she talks about right here, she says there's no set rules for spacing Romans. And in the past, we've shown some mechanical ways to space, but really in the end, it's your eye that is guiding you. You can come up with the spacing mechanically. It usually is what you want, but look at it and see. I'm looking at this. There's a couple things that bother me on this. There's so much space around this E and V. Also, and then I look at this space here. To me, this looks like so much more. So personally, I would put those closer together. But I gotta say, Susan is much more of an expert than I am. So I wouldn't claim to know more than she does. Just for my own eye, I would put those closer together. When she talks about, she says, when you look at what you're doing, squint. And if you're looking at things too close, you will see black sections, and then you'll see white sections, and the O's will be holes in your writing. So you can try squinting, and then evenly spaced, you squint, it should look pretty even. Wide spacing, she says, it's harder to read. The words don't hold together as well. Look at that space between the two words. It's not that much different than the space between the letters. So these are examples of what not to do. She talks about checking the spacing, that's the squinting. I took a class with Beth Lee, and she did things that would help. And I'm thinking of Christopher Hannes also. You take 3 letters at a time, and you can compare them with another 3 letters. Now these, they look well spaced. Just when you're comparing, they're just too close together. So, and here, the one that's evenly spaced, you look at the CED, and then you can look at the SPA, and those, they look well spaced. You can then look at these 3. That helps you focus in on just a few letters at a time. Here, I'm looking at the one that bothered me, EVE, and then I'll go with ENL. It still bothers me that this has so much more space, but really, if you look at this, it's not hugely. And here's a Dr. Nan has a comment. Dr. Nan, the gap between the A and C and the word spacing. Yeah, she says this whole word is wide. And I just think the diagonals, you put them closer together because you've got all that extra space. So that's just something, you look at it with your eye. And when we talked about mechanical spacing, we talked about how you can adjust for diagonals. I'm going to talk about these letters as I demo them. I'm going to move the chat box out of the way. And she talks about Romans. She talks about the numerals, and she's saying same height as the Romans, and they would be if that's what you're writing, all Romans. Julian Waters used to call these capital numbers if they're the same height as the Romans. But let's say you're writing foundational or italic, you're writing an address, you might like your letters a little shorter. That's a matter of taste. So sometimes letters are written smaller, but the standard is the same height. If you're writing in all Romans, you're writing the same height of letters. I'll talk about adding serifs as I write this. And the other thing I notice is she uses 6 pen widths high, which I think the last time I did Romans with someone, I think we did them 10 pen widths high. I think these are easier to write. They're shorter. They're more, when you write them higher, it's more likely you'll have a wobbly line, your lines won't meet up, etc. I like the 6 high. So it's something to try. I'm going to go ahead and this book is so old and it's not in print anymore. I may just scan a small section of it and sending it out. It's for learning purposes, but I do really encourage you to buy this book if you can, because it's got a wealth of information. I did a teeny bit of warm up, but I was also working on my project. So I may do a couple letters more than once. I did, where's my warm-up sheet I did earlier? Right here. This was from yesterday and a little bit today. And here's my first R and here's my R after warm-up. And I thought quite a difference. It just showed to me how it really pays to warm up. And the A, the first letter I did, I wrote that one quite a few times. And tonight I'm using Vermilion Sumi. I'm using a Mitchell. This is my favorite pen. I learned using speedballs and Browser nibs. I took a class with John Rafter, who taught at the local college uh, right before the pandemic. Unfortunately, he passed away during the pandemic. But he had studied with Donald Jackson, and he said that Donald Jackson had them use Mitchell's. And I thought, you know what? If those are good enough for Donald Jackson, they're good enough for me. And I started using them. They're a lot more flexible, less stiff than Browses. Speedballs are even more flexible. I like Speedballs also. I think I just, for some reason, I do prefer the Mitchells. Those are my favorites. I'm going to do these half size. Normally, when I'm doing pencil letters, I demo at full line, 8 squares, but I'm gonna demo at 4 squares. And I did some reading. I brushed up on what Sue Hufton, what she shared. I know her book says Susan Hufton. I've heard her referred to as Sue, so that's just what I usually just say. I don't, I'd like to ask her what she prefers to be called. So I'm going to do an A, and many of you have been, every September, I do a review of the proportions. And somewhere here, I have my proportions, and I will just kind of talk about them. The A is one of the 3/4 square letters. And by now, after demoing this for all this time, I kind of have that memorized. I'm going to try to focus this better so you can see well. It should automatically focus, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I think I'll zoom in. Okay, and let me know if that's not, if you can't see clear. And I'll try to keep my hand out of the way of the camera so that you can see. And I usually dip this in water just to get it flowing. So I'm going to start right here. And what Sue says is when you do your narrow stroke, first of all, we're at 30 degrees. Romans, she writes them at 30 degrees. If you look at this chart, I love this graph paper because it has this chart. 45 degrees. Okay. 45 degrees is from this corner to this corner. 30 degrees is from this corner to just above halfway. There's halfway right there, and it comes to just above that. So I usually go up here, get my pen at the right angle, come down here. But she says for this first narrow stroke, diagonal stroke, flatten so it's a little bit wider, and that's too wide. Okay, and then you get back to 30 degrees for your second stroke. So let me do this again just to, I won't flatten quite as much as I did on that last one. And that's why we warm up. I would play with this till I got what I'd want. And this one I think is a little too, I'm a little too slanted. And then your crossbar, flatten it. Okay. I'm going to keep an eye on the time so that I don't run over, because I want to have time to demo some things for our project also. So some tips from Sue. And I gave you Marcia Brady's exemplar if you didn't have Sue Hufton's. She doesn't have serifs on her. Susan has serifs on her, and to me, it just makes it easier to get the ink flowing with these small serifs. Here's again Sue's serifs, just a little serif right there, little serifs at the bottom of the strokes. Just helps get it going. So here's the B, and a B is usually just under 2 wide, 2 squares wide, half a square. And I did that at 30 because it is a major thick stroke. And then I come in here. And when we did our skeletons, we did them less than this too, but I think because, and when I say less than 2, I'm saying this width right here. But because I'm working with such a thick pen, I'm not going to worry about being less. And I'm going to point out a couple things that Susan said were problems to watch for. So, and that is a problem right there.
Sorry,
See,
Christy,
that's,
are you using how many pen whips right now?
6.
Oh, thank you.
I did when I practiced yesterday. I did the pen widths right there. 6 pen widths. And
Thank you.
so what I did was I played with it till I got the pen that was right for this fit. But if you can always just do your pen widths and use that height. And I'm using the grid so you can see it, but you don't have to use a grid. You can just figure out your height with whatever pen you're using. So for this B, right there, that slant, that is not right. So I'm going to do this again to show you. That's what Sue showed as a problem. So here's my stroke. And then I come out with a little serif, come around 30 degrees, and then I'm just going to come to there. And then the next one I'm going to start and I'm going to come out straight. And this is what she was saying. It should be straight like that, not slanted. One great thing about her book is she points out these problems. I'm going to do the C and show you what she pointed out as a problem. But also let me tell you what she says about the families. So the B, let's see if she has anything. No, she had no other additional comments for the B, but for the C, I'm going to show you what she said not to do first. And a C is about 7/8 of a square. Let me get this going, dip it in the water. And then I come flat. And then here's what she said not to do. Don't do that big tooth on it that's coming in. And the reason she said not to do that, it doesn't lead your eye to the next letter. If you do the way she wants you to do it, let me do that next, and I'll talk more about these. You flatten it, and you just do a little serif. And it should come a little further. That's kind of lumpy. But she said, this brings your eye back into the C. It's not leading your eye to the next letter. If you just put a teeny serif there, that's not going to take your eye away from the progress. This ink is not flowing as nicely as I would like. There, now that I redipped, it's doing better. and just a little serif. And then so I'm going to just like start the next one. I'm not really, maybe I'll do the next letter just so we can talk about leading the I. Probably I made that a little too fat. But see, your I just leads along now to the next letter, where if I had done this one, I'm going back into itself. But she also said, you're taking up the space on the inside of that letter. And one thing with having the proper letters is we have the right amount of space. One thing Sue talked about, and many of my calligraphy teachers have talked about, look at the counter space. Don't just look at your strokes. Look at the space inside. Compare it with the example. So you can look at mine. It's this one's, other than this big serif, is a little closer. This is kind of angular. So this would I'd want more warm up. But this is what I'm looking at, and when I have this in here, I'm taking up space. Let me redo this D because I made that too big. And what I might do is just mark the edge of the square, 30 degrees. I'm going to talk a little more about that stroke too. Okay, I like to do a little starting stroke there. I'm going to come here. And that's a better width on the D. Still a little wide, but it's a little better. So with warm up, I would get a better D, but that's much closer. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of these letters just because we have other things to do. I'm going to go through the different families though. So I'm going to go on to an E just to talk about one thing she said about it. And an E in Sue's alphabet, and most of the way people do Romans, it's a half a square. But what she talked about is the bottom stroke is usually a little longer than the top and the middle. And again, you flatten those. You're not doing them at a full 30 degrees. They're a little flatter, so they're not as thick. And one thing you're looking for when you're doing really good Romans, you want this to be the same width as this. So obviously I had the nib flatter than here because it's thinner. I probably did not have this E at 30 degrees. See how much thicker that is? So that's just with warm up and watching practice, you'll avoid that. Okay, the other one is M. She drew an M like this. This is the what not to do. And what the problem is here is how splayed these are. The M should be a lot straighter. It's angled out, but not this much. Usually, so this one goes a full stroke across. Usually an M starts just inside the circle and might come out to the middle of the next circle. And then you come in. Okay, so I've drawn that with a pencil. I'll go over it with pen. I'm going to have this a little steeper, but not totally steep because we don't want it to be super thin. Now I'm back to 30 degrees. Another a little bit steeper. And then back to 30. Okay, so you can see how much less splayed this one is. And actually, well, that one's not quite right. The way I actually like to do them is I start right inside this line and I stop right outside it. That's my own preference. And so I'm going to do that on this one. And I need to flatten that slightly so it's not so super thin. And then just right outside. So that's the way I do it. And I think that looks very similar to what Susan does. Just you don't want them this much of a slant. Okay, and what not to do on a K. Okay, I'm at 30 degrees. And then I do the top one. And I think when I've done Ks, I do them as the half square. Some people do them as 3/4. And we've talked before, that's your choice because they're just done different ways by different experts. So you pick which works for you and stick with that. Now, what not to do is start in here and come out. And see how bulky and fat that is there? So what she does, and most teachers I've studied with, get this going. Start this, just come right there, and then start it outside. Don't go into the stroke. And look how much nicer that looks. And also the other thing I did was I had this super thin. It does get thin, but I got thin a little too quick. So this one's better. Has more weight on the top stroke. S. So S is the not to do is pretty similar to what we did with the C. So this is an S, and I'm going to just draw some little circles as guidelines. And then come down here. And then this one, this is the what not to do. So you've got really small spaces inside because those serifs came in. And also we usually flatten the S's out, the tops and the bottoms more than this. I studied with Lisa Engelbrecht early on, and she used to say, you don't want the bottom of an umbrella, especially on a J, she would say that. You're not looking for the bottom of an umbrella. We're making it flatter. So I'm going to do one here. That's the what we should be doing. Hopefully I'll get it right on the first try. And then you just start flatter. And you end flatter with that little serif. And her S had a little, I didn't have any serif, but a little serif. So that's more closer to the what you want to do. Any questions? And Sue has hers, her top one comes out as far as the bottom. The way I was taught by Sheila Waters is we come a little bit shorter. So obviously, there's different ways to do it. I'm going to stick with the little bit shorter, but if Sue does it the other way, then obviously it's right that way also. And then the T, you want that flat, you want that cross stroke flat, not too flat, but flat, because you do not want it to be too thick. Okay, and then you come down with your 30 degrees and a little bitty serif at the end. Okay, and then I'm going to do the R. I think I showed you on the other one what, or I actually showed you what not to do on the R, but let me just go through it once more. Her example was this coming here and then coming down, which I actually don't think that looks too bad, but the proper way is that comes here, and you could come in a little further if you want, but I'm going to get it here. I'm going to start right here, come out, and then, so there's a little straight stroke going into the main stroke. A lot of times when I do R's, I leave a little gap like this. So that's something you can look at other people's. I'm trying to, I've got Marcia's here somewhere, but I've kind of got too many papers. Let me see if I've got hers right here. Yeah, let's see what Marcia does. She does the same as Sue, going straight in.
Your other example on blue paper with white lettering shows an open R.
Yeah. Okay, then that was Gareth Colgan. Yeah, and a lot of people do open R's, but what she didn't, what maybe I should show you a better example of what she said, what not to do. I think actually this one's okay. What she talked about was coming down slanted and then doing this. So that's not an open R. I think it's okay with the open R, but not when you have a line meeting and it's slanted. All right, and the last one that she's got here of the what not to do are the X's. So X is, I think, a 3/4. What do I, trying to see what I'm pretty sure on the one I've showed, I have seen an X as a half, but I believe the way I've put it on my exemplar, it's 3/4. Yeah, this is the one I see more often, 3/4. I have seen a half. All right, so what Sue did, what she said not to do is here's your, and this is a diagonal, but it's a diagonal going the other way. So that's not the nicest. Let me mark my lines so I can not worry about hitting the right spot. And I'm going to do a nicer looking one. I'm not going to do such a long serif. I probably need to add some water to my Sumi. It's not flowing as nicely as I'd like. Okay, so there's the first stroke. I could work on that serif. I don't think it's beautiful, but, and then here's the second one, and this is what not to do. Such a contrast, so skinny. So the one what she tells you to do, she does this. And then the, whoops, am I off the page? I think I am, sorry. Let me do this again. And I'm gonna give myself some guidelines so I'm not worrying about hitting the right line. Okay, and then she flattens a little just to get that thicker. It needs to be thinner than the heavy stroke, but not so thin as that last one I showed you. Right? And that's not, let me do one more. And let me talk about the proportions here while I do it. So when you do the X, you start just on the top, you start just inside the line and you end just outside of it. And then this one, the stroke, just inside and end just outside. That way your top is slightly smaller than the bottom. It gives a more balanced look. Right, that wasn't Sue's what not to do, but I didn't have the best proportions there.
Chris,
Okay.
I'm looking at Susan's X, and it's pretty. There's a lot of contrast there. Her crossbar is very thin.
It is, and I think mine's pretty thin here. But here's her one she said not to do. See how thin that is? A
Much thin.
single line.
Uh-huh.
And then here's her one that she does. Yes, there should be contrast, but just not that much contrast.
Okay.
She just said that picture is too much contrast. And she's talking about that for verticals in general. So those were her samples that apply to all. So see, here's mine, what not to do, how thin that was. And then here's the what to do. Okay. Let me see if there's a few more things I wanted to bring up about what she talks about. So so when you do a vertical, let's say we have a V. And I'm going to draw my line just so I don't have to worry about getting the width right. So it's the first stroke is the heavy stroke on the V. And then here's your thin stroke, but you steepen it because you don't want it to be too thick, but you also don't want it to be that hairline thin. And I think her V is a little wider than mine on her example, but that's a personal thing. And I could warm up and do a nicer one. The other thing I noticed, the difference between Susan and Marcia is Susan has this V, which I like. But one I see more often is the one from Marcia, where you've got this line coming down. So those are just two different shapes. And let me see Susan's. And Susan this might be a little too round. I might want to just flatten that a little bit more. I'd say that's more like what she does. A little bit less, less cornered. Okay, any questions? Any particular letters you have questions about?
Can you show O?
Oh, yeah, okay. So I'm going to just draw the lines so I don't have to try and guess while I'm here. Okay. Get that going. I'll dip it. And the other thing Susan said about the O's and other circular letters is she pierces this line here. and Reggie Ezel pierces these outside lines, and he said he learned that from Herman Zopp. And the reason they pierce those lines, it's an optical illusion. If you don't actually barely go through the line, it will look shorter because the corners are cut off. So I barely gone through the lines. Is that, do you want me to, I'll do it once more. But if I were to do this short of those lines, it would look smaller. And that's, of course, that's lumpy. Got to warm up to get it perfect. And I'll do the Q. And then just, and she had a nice one where she just went right into, then she put an R right there. And it just kind of looked like that bottom of the Q was ligatured to the R. She started her R right there. Anything else? So again, I really recommend her book. She has tips for every family of letters, just details to help you get everything just right. And I'm going to be practicing. So I have a sheet here. Let me find it. I got everything out, but I'm on this little space and everything's piled up. So I've got to figure out, where did I put that sheet? Okay, we're going to talk about variations. So this was a practice sheet I did quite a while ago. And that's where I took that Gareth Colgan. But I'm showing Gareth Colgan, but there are so many. I love like Marie Fredriksson from Sweden, Jürgen Verkempst from the Belgium. There are so many people. You can go out there and say you really like their letters, or maybe you like one of their letters. So what I did with Jürgen, or with Gareth, is I just looked at his letters and then I picked the ones I liked. So he had, and in fact, I'm looking at him now. I did this years ago. His E's are a little straighter on the bottom, but this is what I did. And maybe I'll play around with some little straighter. I'm going into Barbara's closest class and I'm going to be playing with Romans a lot. So I'm going to play with some different, and this O is my O. It's the way I make O's when I print. So if I'm just writing the word rose, I do it more neatly than this, but basically that's the way I print. And so I decided to use that. The only problem with this is my friend Lisbeth Bodens told me that looks like an E. So I could change that. And let me just do a quick O here. I could change it so it starts over here. And I would have to practice this, obviously. I'm going to put more water in this because it's just not flowing that well. But anyway, I could change this, or I'm going to put water in this right now. I did put another drop before we started, but I'm going to put an extra. I practiced this yesterday and then I forgot and left the cap off, and it's just not flowing. So I could play with this, and I could just play and try different things, but I wanted to use my own O. So that'd be something to play with, but that's what I did here. And here's my R with the gap. Here's one that doesn't have a gap. So what I gave you Garris because I just loved how some of his letters looked. And I found out about him from Yukimi, liked his letters, Yukimi Anand. So I took a look at his letters. And if you look at his website, he has a huge variety. He plays with letters all the time. This was just one piece where I really liked his letters. And so I took them and I was writing a letter to a friend here. So there's letters on that. Another, my pen pal, practicing letters. Here I did the L going underneath the A. This was just a big sheet where I practiced letters.
Christy,
Here.
what ink did
Uh-huh.
you use? It's very pretty, especially like that orange-red variation.
Excuse me?
What ink did you use?
Oh, you know what? This is, you know what? I think I got a note on my printer saying it's running out of yellow. So it is orange, but I think the color is not accurate. But I think I probably used like, what's the guy's name? It's one I don't buy anymore because he was called out for some,
Noodlers.
yeah, noodlers. So so you knew right away who I was talking about. He was called out for some racially insensitive labels on his ink. And people thought he was a problem. So I stopped buying his ink. But these, I did buy a lot of his ink before. And these are fountain. This one is practicing with fountain pen inks. Tonight I used this Orange Sumi, which normally flows really nicely. I think it just because I left the cap off, it wasn't flowing. But that doesn't bleed very much. So I use that for what we're doing tonight. If I have the right paper, fountain pen inks work just fine. But there's sometimes I'll use it on envelopes and it'll bleed horribly. I have to throw the envelope away and start over. So what I'd like to challenge you all to do is look at letters you like. Okay, and Eugene said possibly Apache Sunset. I actually think it's probably Cayenne. I have Apache Sunset now, but I got that more recently. I had Cayenne for years and years and years, and I think it's the printer that's making it look more like Apache Sunset, but I'm not sure. But Eugene, you have a point. Apache Sunset would probably look more like that. Okay, any other questions? And what I did with this sheet, so this, I scanned it, but what I did with this sheet is I made a junk journal. We had Michelle Morin from San Jose did a free program for us, and we made junk journals. The covers were made from food boxes, and I covered mine with this sheet. I just love the colors in this. And so I tried to use as much as my calligraphy work as possible in the journal I made in her class. Okay. I'm gonna demo for the project we're working on, but I'm gonna right now go into gallery and see, do we have any questions? Does anybody want to show anything before we move ahead? Let me just get out into my other FaceTime. Any comments, questions? Anybody else that you think you'd like to look at their letters? Wait just a minute, we have some comments there, and I think Nan maybe is watching the chat, but yeah, Sandra's asking if we'll have a link to the recording. Yeah, it takes a while to process them afterwards, but I try to send the link the same night. So after we end, it'll process. I'll upload it to YouTube and I'll send the link. And these, if I lead this group, I just leave them out there forever. If I hire someone, I specify a period. I negotiate a period with them that it'll be available. But mine, I just leave them out there forever.
Christy, could you scan and send Sue Hufton an exemplar you were working with tonight out of her book? For
Yeah.
those of us that won't access her book.
Yeah, that's what I said. I'll scan
Yeah,
that one
yeah.
part of it.
Yeah.
I think because it's a learning purpose and it's such an old book, I will do that.
Thank you. It's just, you know, for getting access. Yeah.
Yeah, I always try not to plagiarize, but I think in some cases we really need it and for learning purposes, so that should be okay.
Well, we can compare it to the Marcia Brady that you
Yeah,
provided us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, so let me move on to the project then, if that we don't have any more questions right now. And I'm
I
actually
have
gonna,
a question.
sure.
Maybe it's a dumb question. I'm just curious when you say this is the correct way to write, or the stroke. So is but I think this is a personal preference, right?
I
How
agree. This is Susan's correct way.
Yeah.
But I would say when it's too thin like that, okay, I'm going back to my camera, just a minute. And let me put it on spotlight. So when I say it's not correct, it's because Sue says it's not correct. And I do consider her an expert. She's saying, because it doesn't look good. It's so thin. If you did this in a whole piece, it would be out of place because it's so skinny. Where if you did your things a little bit thicker, it would just have a more pleasing look. So she's saying, and she says why. She calls these bad letter forms, and she says why. And she's saying it leads your eye, you're not leading your eye on, and you're taking up space inside the circle, which affects spacing. So these are her opinions. I consider her an expert, and I also think most teachers would agree with what she's saying here. So this is her opinion on bad letter forms. But you can always do your own thing. If you're consistent, let's say you had a special, I mean, you can always do things to be a little different at some point. So if you always did every vertical that thin, it would just be a different look. So she's pointing these out to do standard Romans. They're not correct for standard Romans, but you can always do variations.
So it's about the consistency, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and
Mhm.
really, I like this S. This does not look good to my eye, the way these are just such small. And this looks much better. But she's talking about standard Romans, and if you want to do variations, that's certainly your call. And we see people like John Stevens, they use variations effectively. So it's whatever you want to do and you purposely do it. She doesn't want you doing these things not realizing you're not doing them correctly. And I know Barbara Close will say this is very weak looking. If we made a small, a thin line like that on the Z, we would put that European line through it to give it a little more weight. But where Sue does it, she just gives more weight and you wouldn't need that line through it. So yes, these are standard forms. She's trying to teach the standard forms. You can always do variations. And that's what makes it interesting.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I'll go ahead and talk about our project. So I'm working on several of these at once. And which of course means I don't get too far each time because I choose a different one to work on each time. But I'm going to talk about this one. And I had to move some pages to make room. So let me make sure I've got everything. So this is one I started a long time ago, and I would say, quote unquote, I finished it, but then I wasn't happy with it. And I did this in a class with Lisbeth Bodens. And the thing was, I had already done a piece I really liked. This was my second piece that I did at the end of the class. And then when I got done, I didn't like it. But this is redoing it. Here's the piece I did in her class. But then I thought that N looks too skinny. I don't like it at all. And why did I not know? I think because I was rushing, the class was ending. I wanted to get it done. I wanted to have another piece to show. But then I thought, I'm not doing anything with this. I never neatened it up. I just decided I had to redo it. Or not, but I wasn't going to frame it and put it on my wall. That was my personal thing. Now, Lisbeth, she's okay with using skinny things like this. You can do some wide and thin. So like this E is really wide, but it's just at the end, and I just think it looks funny. And that was mine. That's not her critique. And I kind of think she would agree, but because I've taken several classes with her. But there were things I liked on this. So I started, and in each class, when we take them, and I've been to Lisbeth's house, and she's very organized. And for every piece she does, she has a file with all her progression. And then when she wants to do a piece again, she doesn't sell you prints. She sells you originals. She'll just get this out again and trace it and paint it, and she'll sell you another original, but she can do it very quickly. So I took my sheets from that, and I wanted to show you, this is just in class, we blew them up on the printer. We'd put our small piece and blow it up, and then we would improve it, neaten it. So what I did was, this was the piece I was working on, and these are my notes all over it on what I had to do. I made notes, make serifs more elegant. I think they could have a little more of a curve in there, some wasting where the middle is a little thinner, the edge, so I just not so straight. Like this one is a little curved. I like those subtle curves. But when I started looking at this, they didn't all have subtle curves. And now when I looked, and then I wrote fill this out more. It's too narrow. That's my taste. And then I said, well, this is too wide. But when I started redoing this, I thought, well, it's nice to have a variety, thin, wide, thin. So it's something I have to play with. And also this, I have two thicks. That doesn't look right. So I wrote less heavy, and I couldn't remember which is the thick on the Y. So I looked at Marcia Brady's, and so this should be the thin one. So what I did was I took this. So what we would do in Lisbeth's class is we would design, we'd do outlines, and then we would fill it in dark, and then you could really look at it and it would stand out to you. Like, I've got way too much space. If you look at this right here, how much space is there and how much space is there, way too much space. So we would darken everything. And I think that's what happened when I did this one. I don't think I did the last step. I think I skipped it because we're near the end of class. So I didn't darken everything, and it wasn't as obvious how I wasn't going to like it. So what I've been working on this week is I went in and started darkening, but then I thought I'm going to correct some of this stuff. I can already see it. I don't even have to completely darken it before I redo it. So I moved on. I mean, darkening these made it really obvious to me. And also there's a lot of space in here. So I said I could move this closer, and instead of having this little serif, I could touch the two together. So what I did, I put this on my scanner. When we took classes with Lisbeth, the last time I brought my laptop, I had a scanner. But if you went to class and most people don't bring a laptop, we would just put it on the printer and we would reduce. They have that function on them. So this one, I scanned it and then I reduced it 50%. And I came up with this size. And the reason we do this is it's a lot faster to work small. You correct all these problems while you're working small, and then you blow it up and then you correct it. So I'm looking, some of these, if you look at these lines, they aren't all the same width. Look at the N is wider than the M. I could just see problems. So then I started working on them, and I'm not done. I'm gonna darken in, and I'm gonna correct, I'm changing things. But this is my next take. So I went over this. I traced some letters and I moved things. I thought this is way too much space. So I moved this L closer. I've done this one and I filled this out and I like this shape, but this was slanted. It was a little bit leaning and I like that. So my next time, I'm going to darken this. I'm going to look at the spacing, and I kind of think I maybe want to make this bigger. I did make it a little bigger, but I might want to make it even bigger. So I'm going to play with all that, and then I'm going to redo it and I'm going to slant this. And the other thing I'm doing is working on getting these all the same width. Right now I've got a lot of thin ones, but when I go and darken them, I will make them thicker. And I already made the S a little thicker. I'll fill it in and that'll make it very obvious. So my goal is before the next time that we have our study group, I want to have a thumbnail ready to go. And I'll have it, I'm just giving myself the goal to have this size ready to go. But if I can make myself, I just have a really busy month, but if I can find the time, I will blow it up and start neatening it to this size. Or maybe even just in between those sizes. And then you go in here and you just start getting it really neat. You want it to be the way you want it before you transfer it to your final piece. You want it on a piece of copier paper, layout paper, whatever you want to work on. And you're gonna use carbon paper, or you can put soft graphite on the back, and then you trace it and move it on to your final sheet. Okay, so any questions? And I wonder, is anybody, well, I'll stop and people can tell me if they're working on this. But this is where that Gareth Colgan or Marie Fredrickson or Jürgen, you can get ideas from their variations, and you can do like I did, those rows of capitals, but you can also use some of those variations in this piece. And I'm already looking at this. Here's my piece I did. I'm already looking at this and I like it better. And then I'm thinking, I could kind of see, I made this tight. When we talked about mechanical spacing in September, we did half a square spacing. I moved these in closer. I just decided I want them closer. But then I just suddenly thought today, maybe later I'll do another one. I'll do all these letters black, and I'll color in between with gouache, different colors of gouache, maybe sections, blue, red, green, whatever. I'll come up with something, but I could see doing a few different things with this. Okay, I'm gonna switch back to gallery. And I wonder, is everyone working on this, or I mean, is anybody else doing a project? If you are, raise your hand. I might be the only one, which is okay because I want to get a project done. But what about the rest of you? Anybody else want to do a project? Marjorie, are you
want
talking?
to do one.
Excuse me?
I do want to do a project. I have not started a
Yeah,
project.
yeah. So that's, you have, you know, time. I mean, you don't have to do this. This is for fun. But we could also critique each other's if we do them and put them out on our Facebook group. Any other comments, questions? Does anybody want to share anything they did today? I guess we didn't, I mainly talked. We weren't writing that much, so I don't know if anybody has anything tonight. We might get done a little early today. Anything else I should demo? Okay, well, Laura, I see Lori there. Hi, Lori. Lori's in San Diego. Much of the year she's in Washington, but she's in San Diego right now.
Christy, do you want to do a couple of numbers?
Sure. You've got it. Those are going to be pretty similar to the letters. They're going to be the 30-degree angle.
Christy, is bouncing numbers up and down part of Romans or not part of Romans?
That is, no, that would not, that's addresses mainly. It's, you know what, I'd have to research that, but I think it's like vintage Victorian or something, or maybe around the Spencerian area. I'd have to research that. All I know is they say it's old fashioned, it's not modern. Many of us like the look and we do it, but whenever I've been taught that, I'll have to look that up. I'm not sure, because I was taught that the 4 is shorter at some point. I just don't know when that started. So I'll put that on the list to look up.
Thank you so much.
But also nowadays, just for looks, a lot of us bounce thing anyway. So, but that's not tradition. And if we were doing formal Romans, we would not be doing that. Oh, you know, the one thing I forgot to talk about is, let me just get this back on the desktop. The other thing I didn't talk about was I was kind of dissatisfied with my spacing on that. Let me spotlight. And so I went through and I did it's no longer standard, but I did standard Romans in a row. I checked the spacing. I did, I made little lines, checked the spacing. And here, this one's a little closer. And then I started playing with it because I wanted to play with my spacing. Now this M, I wrote it. I said, this is way too wide. And I want to move the L closer. But this is me just playing around with standard spacing. And then I was going to vary it. I was just going to start over and vary it, but I thought this is way too much work. I already came up with some of the variations I want. So then I use this as a reference and I looked at my little piece that I'm working on, and I use this as a reference for the spacing. And it doesn't have to be, if you're doing tilting, etc., the spacing doesn't have to be perfect, but I just was unhappy with my spacing. So that's what I was playing with on this. Just wanted to mention that. Okay, so Sue's numbers. She's got that same, she's just extending, and that's the way we would think. She's extending her techniques. I'm going to mention another thing. So I've studied with John Stevens, and he's the one who taught us that you come down and then you, in the middle, twist a little steeper and then back down. And that gives you a little bit thinner in the center. I can exaggerate that. I'm going to exaggerate just so you see what I mean. You twist it just to give it that wasting. And I had taken classes with people for manipulating like that, but they never explained why, why we were doing it. Well, John Stevens did explain that it just gives it a more fluid look, a more elegant look. So that's something else, but that, get into the flow, get warmed up, and then play with this before you start doing that, because that just adds complexity and you don't want to worry about it till you get those letters down. So anyway, here's a 1. And I want to do it, hers just a little neater. And then just a little serif there, just a teeny little serif. And I could actually, probably the way I would do this is I would want to pierce that bottom line with the left corner, just barely. And I'm going to have to practice that because that's not neat, but that's basically what she did, but much neater. And then the 2, and I would say these letters are probably a half square. And it's the same thing. You don't want this to be a hairline. Come down, flatten it a little bit, and then you come outside the square because you want the base to look like it's really stable. So you just come outside the edges of the square. Any questions? So I would just say all this stuff, play with it. I haven't warmed up on these numbers, but does anyone have a particular one? Usually the O is not an exact round, and I have a feeling this O is not the full square. Let me do one right here. An O would take up 4 squares, but I'm doing mine a little narrower, and I think hers is a little bit narrower. Okay, and then let's just do the ampersand. And really, I should have warmed up with this, but here's this. And then okay. And then here's one thing she talked about on the question mark first. She says she doesn't do a big I think I need to clean my pen too, so this will flow better. Usually Mitchell does flow nicely. She just does a little twist there. A little twist. And sorry, my ink is not flowing nicely, but and then she just does like a little comma. That's how she does hers. You'll see other people who might do a big twist at the bottom, but that is not the way Sue does it. And her exclamation is this simple little thing here. It's like a very narrow J. And then she has that same little comma. Whoops, I'm kind of off. Okay, any other questions? Anything else? I'm gonna have to add even more water to my vermilion sumi. Okay, let's see. Let me just get away from this. Okay. So we have about 5 minutes left. If anyone has anything they want to share or they want to show.
Do you have any comments on the letter A?
Well, that one, I did practice that a few times. Where's my sheet? And it just takes a warm up. I mean, you got to practice that. And here's the thing. Okay, I'm going to hold it up because I turned off my document camera. Here's my first one. It's way too narrow. Right there, way too narrow. And so
Okay.
I warmed up with it, and by the time I was done, it looked more like it. But I think hers are a little wider. So,
So is Marsha Brady's too.
yeah.
That's why I was kind of curious.
Yes,
as
and
to
if
what
you
thought.
look at mine, here's the thing. Usually, when I do them, I come to the outside of the bottom of the square. Let me get my camera back on.
Sorry, I just thought, oh, that could be one that.
Let's just say when I do skeletons and I've demoed them, I did do them differently. And so I need to warm up. So when I do an A, here's my square. And in fact, let me do it larger. Okay. And an A, I do 3/4. So the center would be about here. I come just outside the square at the bottom and just outside the square here. If you look at these, I did not come outside the square, and this one barely, not really though. I get the whole stroke outside the square, and these I did not. And especially here, they're inside. So just, I needed to warm up more, and I need to get those outside the square. That's what's wrong with those. And these are me. I was testing different fluids on this paper. This was, some of this was gouache, some of it was Pelican 401, and it bled. You can see that. But basically, I needed to come outside the square. So if I did it this half that I was demoing here, and it'd be a 3/4, I would start here and go outside. And it'd be a wider letter. So yes, these are too narrow.
Does optically the space of the crossbar make things look wider as well?
Yeah, you've got a point. And I don't know what Sue says about that. I don't know if she mentions it, but she does talk about a lot of all those things. And the other thing is when I first did them, I had the crossbar a little too high. So then I lowered it. And I was trying to get mine to look like hers. And hers are cleaner. So I switched from this walnut ink. It was not very clean. And did I get cleaner ones today?
You're talking like CRISPR.
So I did get a little bit cleaner serifs and all with this Sumi, Vermilion Sumi. So
Yeah.
just have to play around with all this. And that's why it just takes practice. And I just
Don't apologize. I think it's
yeah.
amazing.
No, I mean look,
Good,
if you
right?
look at my first
Yeah.
one, they are
Yeah.
better. They
Yeah.
got better from my first one. So this is just a reminder of why you want to warm up and practice.
Yeah. Thank you, Chrissy.
Yeah, and we're going to be taking Barbara's class. So Well,
Christy, would you mind writing O and 0 side by side?
sorry, what was that?
Can you write 0 and O side by side?
Can you put that in the
number 0
chat?
and letter O.
I do not have the clearest. I've got these head earbuds and they are not the clearest. Can you put
I
that in
have
the
written
chat?
in the chat. Yeah.
Okay, O and 0 and O. Is that what you'd like? Okay. Yeah, I have not found any good earbuds. I need to get some full good quality headphones. Just a minute, I'm getting my guard sheet. Okay. So she does not say how wide her zeros are, but usually, and hers looks a little narrower for the O or the 0. And when I've learned from other teachers, they made the 0 a little narrower. So I made it 3/4. That was what I chose. Okay. And then an O would be the full 4 squares. So this is me. I think her 0 is a little bit rounder than that. So
Okay.
maybe I would do it 7/8 to get one like hers. I think that's more like she did. And so where this one I pierced the outside lines, this one I'm totally inside the lines. And to me, that looks more like what Sue's doing, the size she's doing.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? I'm not really reading the chat because I've been demoing and. Okay, well, I think we're at the end, so I would like to just challenge you, but I know we're all busy and we can't all. I'm going to switch to the FaceTime. So we can't all get that done, but I'm using it as a challenge for myself to get another piece done to frame for the next exhibit. So if you have time, do a piece and we can all comment on it and give you pointers. So any questions before we end? Okay, just a minute. Here we go. Gwen always gets stuff done. Okay,
Wow.
so she's been practicing. And you should see her pieces she does when she used, before she had this job where she worked more hours, she used to just send in beautiful things. Very nice. We should have Gwen showing this. She's more warmed up than I am. Thanks, Gwen. Anybody else?
Well, actually, I was
Nan, okay.
learning
Okay, just let me do
Roman,
Gwen again.
foundational Roman with Elmo singular, and his O actually is quite in a narrower than
Yes, so
one.
that's the
What do you mean?
same. There are different ways to do them. And who did this one?
This one is Elmo singular.
Yeah,
This
so
is what I learned from him.
when it's Trajan where they say it's round, and in
Mhm.
fact, Herman Zopp made them even wider. He would make them a little wider than tall. So it's a matter of opinion. I've had other teachers who did ovals, so it's just the way they chose to do it. And you, as long as you're consistent, but if you do the O a little narrower than the 4 squares, then you need to make all your round letters a little narrower.
Mhm.
Okay, Nan, I think Nan had something to show. Very nice. Thank you very
I'm very
much.
rusty.
I need to practice, and I will now that we're going for Romans.
Christy,
Okay, uh-huh,
I have a question.
sure.
On page 46 of Susan Hufton's book,
Yes.
those reversals, now how different are they from the Romans that we've been studying tonight?
Well, those to me look like they're, you know what, versals are capitals, basically, is what
Right.
they are. And to me, these are more like Trajan, similar, closer, not exactly. But really, versals are capitals that you can use for starting a line with a larger capital. Just they stand out. They're not usually for text. If you're going to write a row of text, you wouldn't usually use versals. They're used for just more formal uses.
Now, if you were looking at the R on that same page.
So let me get this out so people can see what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Just a minute. I'll put my camera back on.
On page 46.
Yeah, I've got it on here.
Oh,
I just
okay.
need to get it for people to see. The R on the left page?
On the left,
Yeah.
on page 46,
Yes.
which is on the
Yes,
left
and they've
side.
got, and are you saying it's got the slant?
It's got that slant, and that's what you were talking about tonight. And I was wondering if this is different from what we've been studying.
No, you know what? I think when Sue's talking, if you look at her page where she talked about that, it actually goes into the line.
Mm-hmm.
And this one does not. It doesn't go all the way into the line. So I think just based on what everyone's bringing up tonight, you can do that, but you don't attach the stroke. I think it looks a little weak probably, but that's just what she said.
Mm-hmm.
So you try it and you see if you like it. Just
If you
go
like-
with it. But I'm looking at this R over here, which is the same one, just not blown up. He just doesn't bring it all the way in, and it seems effective for that.
When she does them on the next page, Christy, she joins the R. Going the other way.
Which way? What page?
48.
Excuse me?
48.
48.
Oh, okay.
See? On the bottom there, she joins the R.
He does
Yeah.
join. Yeah.
She
Mhm.
said it was okay joining, but just
Mhm.
not at a slant.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be straight. She said it needs to be horizontal if it joins. So
Mm-hmm.
here's another one. It's just horizontal.
Horizontal.
So you know what? I'd say all these things are things to pay attention to, but if you want to purposely violate that, they say rules are made to be broken. And you know, some of the most inventive calligraphers break those rules all the time.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I think the thing is it's got to be a nice looking letter. Whatever you
Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
the letter has to look good.
Yeah. And I don't know, I see some calligraphers that I do see, I think they do some pretty ugly letters, but they're being abstract and inventive. And I'm sure to them it looks good. So I guess, yeah, it's got to look good to you, and nobody's going to buy it if it doesn't look good to your audience. If you want to sell your work or display it. So, and look at one thing about Susan's book is she has projects in here, and I don't think this is one of the projects, but there's an idea right there, just going around the outline. So, and these are built up letters, so that's another chapter. Anything, so we had a Versals class with, with Risa Gettler and with Mark Van Stone, and basically, as I understood it, Versals were for decorative use, like these, and large capitals at the beginning of sentences. Okay, let me go back to FaceTime. And I suppose probably now we can, if there's no more questions, we'll close the meeting. I don't mind if anyone has questions, but. Okay, well, thank you all for joining. Thanks for hanging in there. And I hope somebody starts something with the project, but again, no pressure. It's just a fun thing to do.
Thank you.
I'll try to post, I haven't been posting my progress, but I will try to post some on the Facebook page.
Thank you
right.
for your leadership.
You're
It's a
welcome.
wonderful way to start 2025. And we are
Okay.
inspired, and we will, I've started things, but we'll post on Facebook.
I know that you, Susan, and Shirley Wong, you always, and Gwen, do projects, so it's
Well, I
up to
got
each
involved
person.
with sickles this past.
Oh, yes,
And
Celeste.
tomorrow Celeste is teaching that. So I was
Yeah.
thinking, oh, what can be combined with that form and with Romans, right?
Yeah, I took sickles with Celeste years ago in person, probably 10 years ago. So it was fun. I was just really impressed with what we did in a couple hours.
Well,
But I
she's
heard the class
researching.
is full, so
Oh, is it? Okay. Oh, well, I'll be there. We'll see
I
what I
didn't
come
get
up with.
in, but that's fine. I've taken it before. Okay, thank
All
you
right, thank you
all.
so much.
Have a
Thank you,
good month and
Christy.
Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.